The ACC schedule starts for Pitt on Saturday, just 48 hours away from the Panthers' trip to Syracuse for a noon tip-off, and really the beginning of the full-blown ACC schedule. We have to keep offering those caveats since they played that random one-off against Clemson a few weeks ago. But the ACC schedule really dives in, full bore, headlong, the big enchilada, whatever you want to call it. It starts for Pitt on Saturday. So let's talk about what these 19 games look like for the Panthers, what they need the most out of these next 19 games, what they need from themselves in order to win in these next 19 games, and what it's going to take to secure an NCAA tournament bid, as if we know that on December 28th. Let's talk about it, though, on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Thursday. I guess that's what the calendar says. I have no idea what the day is. I have no idea what the date is. This whole week feels like a blur, as it always does. It's kind of one of the beauties of that week between, Christmas and New Year's. Somebody asked me yesterday, they said, so do you have to actually work this week? They didn't really know what my job was. I didn't tell them, yeah, man. I mean, I have youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I mean, aren't you aware? They only had sort of a general idea. They knew I did something with sports or Pitt sports or what have you. But they said, do you have to work this week? As if it's like some uncommon thing for people to have to work this week. And maybe it is. Maybe a lot of people don't work this week. We are working this week, but that doesn't make this week any less of a blur. Still trying to figure out what day it is, what day of the week it is. I believe it's Thursday. I believe it's December 28th. And I believe that means that Pitt is 2 days away from starting the ACC schedule with this trip to Syracuse on Saturday at noon. We'll talk about that game and a lot about the rest of this season here on today's Morning Pitt. But of course, what we always ask you to do is like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the place to do just that. And then, of course, go head over and check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of Pitt fans all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the place to keep up on all the Pitt sports news, and the place to keep up on all of our Pitt video content is right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We have, although we didn't do one on Christmas Day, and I don't think we're doing one on New Year's Day either. We're just going to take those days off. But we'll be back at it the day after Christmas, or we were back at it the day after Christmas. We'll be back at it the day after New Year's. But we have the Morning Pitt videos. We have our weekly live stream that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock like we did last night. Me and Jim Hammett get together for a little Pitt sports talk with you. So hopefully you tuned in for that. And if you didn't, you can catch up on it here and realize that you do want to be a part of it. We'll have, press conferences, post-game press conferences, midweek interviews, those kinds of things. We'll have our live post-game shows, and we'll do that this Saturday after the Syracuse game. This Saturday afternoon, we will go live for the post-game show right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So we have a lot going on, and you don't want to miss any of it. The way to make sure you stay on top of all of it is to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and like this video if you don't mind. We'd appreciate that as well. All right, so Pitt's sitting here at 9-3 after completing the non-conference schedule. Of course, 9-2 against the non-conference. With the losses coming to Florida and Missouri, they added one ACC loss in there as well when they played Clemson at home. Clemson looks like the best team in the ACC. They got the highest net rating. They looked like the best team in the ACC when they played Pitt that day. Jeff Capel said as much, and I don't entirely disagree. But they're now 9-3. And one more game before the calendar changes over to 2024, but that game will be the first of 19 consecutive ACC regular season games, followed by the ACC tournament and whatever else the postseason might bring. And that's probably the big question on top of everything, is like, what does Pitt need in order to lock themselves into a spot in the NCAA tournament? You know, like, I'm of the mind it's too early to talk about resume. I'm of the mind that it's too early to talk about bubble and bracket and projection. I think December bracketology is pretty silly, but it's something to talk about and something to look at. I mean, to be honest, to some extent, the December net ratings are a little bit silly to look at, but it's a little bit more, I don't want to say concrete because it's not concrete, but it's something to look at and it's something kind of interesting to consider. But I do think we can think sort of in broad terms, in a general sense of what Pitt needs to do to get itself in position for an NCAA tournament. Kind of what marks do they need to shoot for? Where do they need to end up when the regular season ends? In order to position themselves for a spot in the NCAA tournament. They'll close against NC State at home. They actually close with two home games, Florida State and NC State. So where do they need to be at the end of that NC State game? Right now at 9-3, I'm kind of old school. I still think 20 wins is a number that means a lot, and it continues to mean a lot. I don't know if it guarantees you a spot in the NCAA tournament, and it certainly hasn't always been that way. Teams haven't always been a lock to get in at 20 wins, but in order to get to 20 wins, that would mean going 11-8 over these 19 games. Is 11-8 a possible record? I mean, yes, they're all possible records. Can Pitt go 11-8 in these 19? And I think it's conceivable. I sort of jotted down all the net rankings yesterday, and we were talking about this on the message boards, so I sort of put it together for there. And you look at quad 1, quad 2. It's interesting. Out of these 19 games, the way the net is rated right now, the way the net ratings look right now, 8 out of those 19 games will be quad 1 games, either Carolina and Duke at home, and then 6 road games. Duke, Miami, NC State, Virginia, Clemson, and Boston College would rank, Boston College even at number 74, because that's on the road. They would just fall under the line of a quad 1 game. I think it goes up to 75 if you're talking about on the road. And so 8 quad 1 games there, 5 quad 2, 3 in the third quadrant, and 4 in the fourth quadrant. I would say right off the top, okay, the first thing you need to accomplish, the first thing you need to do is avoid any losses in those bottom 2 quadrants. Now, these quadrants are going to move around. They're going to change. But right now, as it stands right now, Pitt has quad 3 games against Syracuse, Wake Forest, and Florida State at home, and quad 4 games against Louisville on the road, Louisville at home, and Notre Dame at home. You've got to win those 6. Got to. You cannot have bad losses again. And they had a few last year. They need to avoid that this year. You can't have that clunker. You lose to Duke on the road. You lose to Clemson on the road. You lose, even in Miami or, even Carolina at home, Duke at home. Like, you're going to drop some of those games. And I think, if we look at this sort of ideal, to get to 20 wins, you look at going 11-8. If your 8 losses are all 8 of those quad 1 games, that's not good. But if the bulk of your losses come from those quad 1 games and the rest come from quadrant 2 games, then okay, you'll be all right. I think if you can win 20 games and avoid any bad losses, which means you go 6-0 in those, the Syracuse at home, Wake Forest at home, Florida State at home, both Louisville games, and Notre Dame at home. I think you'll be all right. That's 6. Now you just need to win 5 out of the other, 13 games. 5-8 against quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. It's not going to guarantee you a spot in, because your resume is going to be a little less than impressive unless you can really, if you beat Clemson on the road, you beat Duke on the road, or, or Miami or something like that. But I think, you give yourself a real chance. You win 5 out of those top 2 quadrant games. You don't lose any of the quadrant 3 or quadrant 4 games. Then you're at 20, what is the math? 20-11. At the end of the regular season, you got a chance in the NCAA or in the ACC tournament. Maybe you're, I don't know. I don't think that, going, what would that ultimately 11-9 in conference play. I'm not sure that really gets you a great seed. I don't think you're going to get a double bye out of that one, but you might have an opportunity to win 2 more games. And now you're 22-11. And you probably, just on sheer volume of wins, have put yourself in position to make the NCAA tournament, I would think. Now, there have been surprises. There have been teams that win 20, 21, 22, but they have, no real impressive wins, and maybe they have some bad losses as well. I think you can get away with this schedule. I think you can get away with, reaching 21, 22 wins, including the ACC tournament, and not having any bad losses. I guess they would lose a game in the ACC tournament, so they ended up like 22-12 under this sort of imaginary scenario. But you can get away without any bad losses and still sort of work your way up to 20, 21, 22 wins, and you should be in position for the NCAA tournament. Now, you start pushing that number up if you can get to, out of these final 19 games, if you can go 12-7 or 13-6. Now you're looking at, I think, avoiding play-in games and all that and sort of making yourself a lock for the NCAA tournament before the ACC tournament ever starts. So the opportunity's there. And I guess the point I'm making is there should be enough winnable games. There should be enough games that would be bad losses that Pitt can win. That they can get to that. They can break through 20 wins and avoid any bad losses and have themselves in position for the NCAA tournament. That's what I think. Now, what's that going to take? What do they need to do? What does Pitt need in order to get there? Now, obviously, you need Blake Hinson to be awesome. Like, Blake Hinson needs to be an ACC Player of the Year contention, and in that conversation all season long. He needs to be, in the conversation for first team all conference. May or may not get it. Probably won't win Player of the Year, but he needs to be in that conversation. He needs to play at that level throughout these 19 games. That's number one, period, point blank. If that doesn't happen, they're going to be in real trouble. Okay? So I don't even need to list that as one of the three keys going down the stretch here, but that's a big one. That's just like an obvious thing that they have to do. That's a given. It's as much as like, well, they need to wear sneakers. You know what I mean? Like, they need to dribble the ball and not just try and pick it up and run with it. They need Blake Hinson to go off, every night. A lot of 20-point games and never less than like 15, 17, 18 points. I mean, he's got to be the guy. Those are automatic necessities. Three other things, though. Three big keys. And number one is Bub Carrington. All right? Blake Hinson is the MVP of this team. To some extent, Bub Carrington might be the most important player on this team, because if he can really continue developing and continue growing, and we talked about this before, and I think somebody took issue with me saying that he struggled once they got into some high major competition. But I mean, I think you look at how the production dipped and how it changed, and certainly Florida and Oregon State and Clemson and Missouri found different ways to defend him. And I think he's learned about that. I think he's learned from those experiences. I think he's learned and he's adjusted and he's continued to improve. And he has to continue to improve. Like, Bub Carrington has to get better, even a little bit better every game, okay? He's got a great shot, whether it's from deep or it's pull-up jumpers or whatever it is. He can score in a variety of ways. I still would like to see him drive to the basket even more. But he's a really, really good player. There's no question about that. He could be the most important player because every step he takes forward, every bit of offense he can provide creates another threat for this team that other teams have to respect. Creates another threat that's going to take attention away from Blake Hinson. And that's not just to say, well, Bub Carrington needs to be good so Blake Hinson can be really good. It's to say that Bub Carrington needs to be good so that Blake Hinson can be good, which will then draw attention away from Bub Carrington. And if you have both of those guys going, you are one of the most dangerous teams in the conference. Blake Hinson will be one of the most dangerous players in the conference. If Bub Carrington can get to that, not get to that level, but can get to a level where he is feared in this conference, and I think he's got a chance to be that player this year, then they will be one of the most dangerous tandems in the conference. And you throw in, Ishmael Leggett just popped up on the screen a second ago. I think he's going to always, ideal scenario. Blake Hinson's going off. Blake Hinson's playing really well. Teams got to really focus on him. Bub Carrington is playing really well. Teams have to focus on him so much. Well, in the middle of all of that, Ishmael Leggett's just going to flow through and have some games where he just, scores a lot. I think because of all the attention that will ultimately be paid to Blake Hinson and Bub Carrington. But it all works if Bub continues to elevate his game, which I think he will. He's getting a lot of attention from defenses. He needs to force defenses to continue paying that attention. You know what I mean? He can't slip. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. January and February are long months. They're long months for a college basketball team. They're long months for veteran players, and they're really long months for young players who are in primary, prominent roles for the first time in their careers. And that's not to say that Bub Carrington's not up to the task, but we've seen plenty of freshmen at Pitt and elsewhere hit a wall when you get into January and you get into February. I mean, that is a long stretch. We're talking about 19 games here, which is a lot. And they're not all played in January and February, but it'll feel like it is. It'll feel like it's just stacking one on top of another. And they'll get an off week here or there. They'll get a couple days off. I think they have 2 breaks, right? Or they have 1. I forget exactly how it works out, but it's a grind. All right, and he's going to it's going to wear on him, and it's going to create pressure on him, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to create a lot of adversity for him. But that's where all the good things about Bub Carrington, all the things we've heard about and seen, as far as being a coach's son and coming up in the game and growing up in the game and really just understanding what the game is and what it needs, what basketball demands from you, I think that's where some of those things can pay off. And if he can fight through that adversity and fight through that wall, I think he'll hit it no matter what. But when he hits that wall, it's about how he responds to it. And if he can learn how to keep pushing and fighting through it, this team can be really dangerous. Now, in addition to all of that, that's key number 1. Bub Carrington's got to be the most important player on this team. Number 2, you need a 4th scorer. And I think what might be unique about this team is I think the 4th scorer will rotate. It'll change. It'll be different on different nights. I think Blake Hinson, Bub Carrington, and Ishmael Leggett are going to perform pretty consistently, but you're going to need a 4th guy. But I think some nights it'll be Guillermo Diaz-Graham. I think some nights it'll be Zach Austin. And then on rarer occasions, you might get a Federico or Jorge Diaz-Graham or a Jalen Lowe. I can see Jalen Lowe going off and being the 4th scorer a couple times over the next 19 games. Maybe Will Jeffress has 1 or 2 4th scorer games in there. Guillermo Diaz-Graham is going to be really, really interesting to watch because he's produced pretty well over the course of his career, over 2 seasons, when he has gotten like 20 minutes or more. He's been able to put up numbers. He's going to be getting that kind of playing time. I wouldn't be surprised if he stays in the starting lineup for a while. And we'll see what Jeff Capel goes with at Syracuse on Saturday. But I would imagine he'll stay in the starting lineup. And if he does, I think that's going to lead to more 20-plus minute games. And we'll see if his production keeps up. Now, obviously, the level of competition is going to step up. You're not playing South Carolina State anymore in Purdue-Fort Wayne. You're going to be starting against Syracuse. You're going to be starting against Duke. You're going to be starting against North Carolina. The next few games, you get Syracuse on the road, you get Carolina at home, Louisville on the road, which should be a win, and then you get Duke at home and Syracuse at home, and then Duke on the road. So out of your next 6 games, you've got Syracuse, Carolina, Duke, and Louisville. Take Louisville out of there, and the other 5 games are Syracuse, Carolina, Duke. That's a challenging stretch, and it's going to be a challenge for Guillermo Diaz-Graham. I'm really curious to see how he responds, but I think he could, have nights where he's the 4th guy. I think Zach Austin's emergence as a spark off the bench, I love that role for him. I think it really fits him well, and I think he's embracing it. I think he's playing well in that role. So those guys, I could see sort of alternating in as that 4th scorer. Between the 2 of them, probably, I would say most of these 19 games, one of those 2 will be the 4th scorer on this team and maybe even climb themselves into, they're not always going to be the 4th leading scorer. They'll be somewhere in the top 4 scorers along with Hinson, Leggett, and Carrington. Most of the next 19 games, it'll be one of those 2 guys. And then every now and then you might get a Federico game or a Jorge game. We'll see a Jeffress game or a Jalen Lowe game. But I think that'll be interesting to see who emerges and really presents a viable threat as a 4th scorer to go along with Hinson, Leggett, and Carrington. And then the third key is rebounding. And I think they've been a good rebounding team this year. I think they were a better rebounding team at the beginning of the season. I think they slipped a little bit. Obviously, level of competition is going to play into that, but they've continued to rebound well on the defensive end of the court, which I think was an area they got into trouble last year. I feel like maybe the Miami game, the Notre Dame game, I think was one where I believe they gave up a lot of offensive rebounds. I think I could be getting those mixed up. They really had some rebounding issues that cost them games last year, particularly giving up offensive rebounds to opponents. They've been really good defensive rebounding this year. I think they've been improved on their own offensive end as well, and that's got to keep up. I think that can be one of the elements that pushes this team to greater success than last year's team experienced, is if they can be better on the boards. And I think they have been so far this year. They've got to keep that up and be there the rest of the way. They've got to be that good rebounding team. And if they can, giving them a chance to win quite a few of these final 19 games. So Bob Carrington, a fourth scorer, and rebounding. Those are the three very obvious, not exactly deep dive analysis keys to the rest of the season. But look, just because they're obvious doesn't mean that they're not true. I think those are those are the most important things that this team needs to do as they push for 20, 21, 22 wins in the regular season and see what they can get the ACC tournament and a return to the NCAA tournament for the second year in a row. It's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be really, really interesting. And don't forget, like I said, we'll have a post-game show on Saturday after the Syracuse game. So we'll talk about whatever we see, Panthers versus Orange. We'll talk about it right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And that way you don't miss that post-game show or anything else we do right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you're not losing track of the days like I am. It's Thursday, December 28th. I keep checking my computer right over there. The computer's right here, but I keep checking the little date thing in the upper corner to make sure to remind myself that it is Thursday, December 28th. So I hope you've had a good week. Hope you haven't lost track of the days. I hope you have a great Thursday. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, Friday morning on the Morning Pit, right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.